Hi everyone, my name is Terry and welcome to my channel, The Pink Dumbbell Problem, and a new video in my series called In the Discourse. Today in the Discourse I've got 3 stories for you, one about the recently wrapped up Olympics that I promised a few weeks ago, and a couple more about some things that have been happening on the more social media side of the discourse. Let's get into that right now. So it's been a couple of weeks. I took last week off from making videos because I had a writing project that needed to be finished up, and with everything going on in the world, it didn't quite seem right to talk about my particular topics. I'm back now with a couple of stories, including one I promised in my last video. So last time I saw you for this series, I talked about the change to the traditional costuming women could wear in Olympic figure skating, and I said I would do an Olympic wrap-up. And I'm not. When the Summer Olympics wrapped up in the summer, back in August, I did a whole vlog piece on all of the gender stories that came out of the Summer Olympics. And I had thought I would be doing something similar for the winter. The thing is, the Winter Olympics don't have the same number of gender stories that the summer ones do. That's kind of what I want to talk about today. There were a few stories, and there was a lot of bragging from the Olympic Committee and stuff like that about this is the most gender equal Winter Olympics they've ever had and such and such. But no real big stories and no big controversy. There was really nothing in this particular Olympiad that had people buzzing all over the different social media sites. If you think back to the Summer Olympics, there was a lot of stories about clothing, and there was a lot of stories about the mental health of athletes, and there was also quite a few stories about the number of trans women athletes that were competing in the Summer Games. I have another story coming up later about trans athletes. Just hang on, we're getting there. Okay, so here's what I think is happening. Other than the story about figure skaters wearing full-length pants, there's really not a lot of clothing controversy. When you look back at the Summer Olympics, for example, the Norwegian handball team got a fine for wearing the wrong kinds of shorts because the shorts they wore were a little too covering. Those kinds of stories. You're not going to get that in the Winter Olympics because most people are dressed head to toe in winter clothing. There's not that sort of salacious, let's look at these bodies on display kind of thing. There is a bit in figure skating, but really that's the only winter sport where you're going to get really skimpy outfits. You get tight outfits in other skating-based sports like speed skating, but they're not about being revealing. So the sheer amount of body coverage in winter sports just eliminates a whole chunk of that. The whole thing around dress codes, again, with the exception of that one story about the skating, really doesn't apply. I did another video last spring about dress codes. I'll put a link down below for you. Well, like any Olympiad, there were controversial stories and there were arguments about all kinds of things, and there was questions about ethics and everything going on. None of them were really gender specific. So basically that's my 2022 Winter Olympic wrap up. The other 2 stories I wanted to look at are not news stories at all. I mentioned early on when I started the Discourse series that this would be not just about things in the news, but it would be whatever people are talking about out there, including on social media. So the first one is something I actually brought up on Twitter. It came up on my Facebook timeline under the Reels section because, you know, they really put a lot of effort into shoving the reels into your face. So I had to have a little rant on Twitter and Facebook a couple of days ago about this. This was a video of a fellow showing some different back exercises, and I didn't look into whether this person has a fitness credential or they knew what they were doing. I watched a few seconds of the video. The form was fine. The instruction he was giving was fine. But what I really want to pick at here is the clickbait of the title. So what he's saying here is, you know, these exercises will shred your back fat. You'll lose all the fat in your back if you do things. He was doing like some bent over rows and reverse flies. And yes, those will target the muscle, but they're not going to do anything for the fat in that area. Once again, I've already done a video on spot reduction. I'll put a link down below. Cole's Notes version. Spot reduction is this myth that the exercise you do in a particular area will burn the fat in that area and therefore make it flatter or thinner or make the muscle underneath the fat more visible. It's not true. When you lose fat from your body, you lose it from all around, and you lose from your extremities first. So your hands, your feet, your arms, your legs, your face. So no, crunches will not give you flat abs. They will increase the size of the muscle, but they won't burn the fat in that specific location. Spot reduction has been debunked for decades. It got really, really popular for a little while there in the late 80s and early 90s, and it just seems to have held on tenaciously. We can't seem to get it out of the public discourse. And just to give you a few examples of how common it is to see language like this advertising fitness videos and articles and you name it, I did a little search this afternoon on Google, and these are some of the examples I came up with just with a quick Google search. All I searched for in the Google search was burn fat on the abs, burn fat in the back, burn fat in the upper arms. These are the kind of things that I got. Now, to be fair, a lot of these things came from articles or videos from actual experts that were debunking the idea of spot reduction. But what's important to understand is how common it is, even when the actual content of the video or the article is scientific, how common it is to use language like this to get people to click. And as a result, I think what happens is people search how to burn fat. They see hundreds, if not thousands, of articles with these types of titles on them, and they think that this must be the legit thing. If they don't happen upon one of the ones that debunks the spot reduction myth, then the myth is reinforced. And I don't really blame any of the presenters or writers or content creators that are creating this stuff, because they're trying to get clicks. They're trying to make a living off of this stuff. And the best way, unfortunately, to do that is to promise people that if they do exercise X, Y, and Z, they'll burn fat in a specific location. The thing that bothers me too is that clickbait titles shouldn't be rewarded. And as a YouTube creator, we're always warned, don't do clickbait titles. It sets people up with the wrong impression. It can ruin your channel. And yet, when it comes to fitness content, clickbait titles actually still work. That's also part of a broader problem too, of people not understanding basic exercise science and the physiology of how body composition can change. Mia Mulder released a video on Thursday that was about trans women in sport. It is an excellent video. I highly, highly recommend you go watch that. She did a great job. Excellent video. No notes. I say it's excellent because she kind of repeats a lot of things I've already said on this channel and in other formats over the years. But she did a really, really thorough job of basically all the main points of why women don't perform the same way as men in various sports, including the economic factors, the access to training, etc., etc. I'm not going to explain it anymore because I'm not here to explain her video. You can go see that on your own time. But I want to talk to you about something I saw in the comments. I know. Rule number one, don't read the comments, right? But I do kind of look through them, especially on a video on a topic like that, because, you know, anything about trans women and especially trans women in sports is going to bring out some interesting comments, usually some really bad ones that I can then go and myth bust in either on videos on this channel, or sometimes I do that in my academic writing or the presenting work and the public speaking work that I do outside of this. So it is where I get some of my good material. This is also important to me because I actually just did a presentation that included some of this information. On Tuesday, I spoke to the second year women's studies students at Mount St. Vincent University here in Halifax, my alma mater. I talked a bit about some of this stuff and why the whole argument about trans people participating in different sports with their gender group is not the argument that the gender critical transphobic people think it is. I'm going to show you a little screen clip of the comment that was left on Mia's video. Before I do, just to be clear, when I show things like this, I block out the name of the user because, first of all, I don't want to give them a platform to become more famous or infamous. And secondly, if they ever do come around in the future to the right side of this, I don't want this to come back and haunt them. So that's why the person's name is blocked out. This line is what I'm particularly interested in. The idea, of course, in most arguments is that trans women have an advantage over cisgendered women in sport, therefore it's not fair for them to participate. This person was basically doing the flip test, which is a good idea. You can always flip discussions around and see if it works from the other angle. Basically what he was saying was that trans men are not performing at high levels, which proves that because they were born with female assigned bodies and female physiology and all of that, that they are not ever capable of coming up to male levels of sport performance, even with testosterone supplementation and that sort of thing. And what this guy was ignoring, and Mia did cover this a little bit in her video, what this guy's ignoring is the participation gap between boys and girls at very, very young ages. So at this time in history, as of recording, as they say, people who are trans men generally were raised as girls. That being raised as a girl has way more of an effect on how they were able to access sport and particularly sport coaching as children than the fact that they were born with female anatomy and physiology and assigned female at birth. When children are really young, pre-puberty, there's really no difference in sport performance that is really measurable when the kids have had equal amounts of training. But there's the rub. They don't get equal amounts of training. And this is what this commenter was basically completely ignoring is, yes, in the sense he's right that supplementation of hormones and stuff like that is not bringing trans men up to the same level of performance as cis men, even when you account for height. But cis men who perform at elite levels, so world-class events like the Olympics, or are professionals who get to perform in sport training all day, every day, because it's literally their job, they get access to training at a much, 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 much younger age. It's really only in the last 20-ish years that most girls have been able to access most sports. Who gets to have that very early access to sport training? Kids who train for things like hockey today are starting as young as 3 and 4 years old in a lot of cases. Parents aren't going to put a child that they perceive to be a girl into that level of training because why would you? It's only ever going to be recreational for girls. There's a few exceptions, obviously things like figure skating and gymnastics, which are the more feminized and female appropriate sports. But even with all of the changes we've had in the last few decades with access to sport for girls, it's still very, very much at the recreational level. And that means that people who are identified as girls at a young age are not getting the same level of training as people identified as boys at a young age. And that absolutely matters. They don't get as much quality coaching. They don't get the quality equipment. They don't get the space to perform in and practice in and have games and competitions in. I mean, hey, I'm in Canada, right? We're a hockey country. Do you know how hard it is to get ice time, let alone to get ice time for a group of girls? Forget it. All of those things are not afforded to people identified as girls, as children, the way they are to people identified as boys. And all of that cumulatively over time has an effect on where that athlete is going to be when it comes time to looking at, could they potentially become a world-class athlete? Could they go to the Olympics? Could they become a professional in a given sport? So as much as that guy on that comment thought he had a gotcha there, he did not have a gotcha. I think a lot of people think that once a policy like allowing girls access to sports spaces is put in place, that there's like this instant change and everybody's expected to perform exactly the same as everybody else. But just because access has been opened as a policy doesn't mean it's being enacted in reality, doesn't mean it's actually happening. And it also may say that they're equal on paper, but that doesn't mean that they're getting equal funding and everything else that goes into that. So there you go. You can use that if somebody gives you that argument about trans men in sports, proving all of their transphobic ideas, because it doesn't. It's changing, it's getting better, and every few years somebody does a study and realizes that the performance gap has closed between men and women because the access gap has closed between boys and girls. So we're getting there, but it's going to take a couple of generations to get through to that level. And if you want to read more of this stuff, I've mentioned this book a few times on this channel, but check out The Frailty Myth by Colette Dowling. And I also highly recommend, if you want a more Canadian perspective, Out of Bounds by Helen Lenski. I've used both of these books quite extensively, and they're both full of tape flags. You know me, I love a tape flag. They both do a fantastic job of explaining all the gatekeeping that's been done. Thanks for watching, everybody, and thanks for sticking with me with my time off. I will be back next week, of course, with more talk about fitness, feminism, and philosophy. Before I sign off, don't forget to click all the things down below. There's some other videos down there, and of course, there's my links to my social media accounts, my Patreon, my Twitter, etc., etc. So go have a look down there, and go have a look at my Threadless store, because I got some fun stuff up there. In the meantime, lift heavy, fight the patriarchy, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye.